briefly introduce you guys. Joanna, you just saw on screen. If you saw the Steve Jobs movie, you saw a very fictionalized version of her as well. Kate, what do you think of the Kate Winslet version of you?
Well, she's wonderful. She's an
She's a
amazing
good actress.
yeah.
So you were at, among other things, you were at General Magic. And we can
Yes.
talk about that story.
Yeah.
Chet Kanojia, many of you know as the former CEO of Aereo.com. We'll talk about that experience. You're now running Starry.
That's right.
Dalton Caldwell is now at Y Combinator. Previously, you ran iMeme, AppNet, something called Pick Please. I always get hung up on the pronunciation there.
That's right. You got it.
So again, thank you very much for coming on. Not a lot of people want to come on stage and talk about things that didn't work out. But I want to talk to you about that. So again, thank you. I think we maybe just start by talking about what happens when do you get to the point where you realize the thing you're doing is not going to work? The company you started is not going to work. The company you joined is failing. You need to leave. How do you get to that point, and then what happens then? So we'll just start with Joanna. At what point did you realize General Magic was not going to work? How many years into it were you?
5 years into it, and after the product shipped, actually.
And no one bought it?
And no one bought it. Well, you know, one of the reasons that no one bought it was also because by the time it shipped, we didn't have very much money for marketing. And what you saw in the film was me saying that I did not think that they should have introduced the vision a year in advance and blown the wad. These are the companies that were our partners. We were, you know, we weren't making our own device, so it was being made through OEMs, and they essentially spent their marketing dollars on the announcement of their CEOs being involved with a vision. You know, this was the vision envy that everyone had in those days. But
so you put 5 years of your life into this company.
Right, exactly.
And what was? Do you remember the day you said, "I'm done"?
Yes, I think. You know, I was very disappointed that we were not able to pivot toward the internet, and it was pretty obvious that that was not going to be part of the equation. And so, you know, let me back up just 1 second, if you will allow me. You know, when you fail like that, it's a cluster of decisions as well as circumstances. First of all, the circumstances were technological. There was no infrastructure. The battery technology wasn't there. The CPU technologies weren't there. You know, so there were a whole host of things that were very much premature in technological sense. But one of the other problems that we had is that at that time, capital was very difficult to come by. And in order to realize this enormous vision, you needed a lot of capital. And the way we chose to fund it is through partnerships. And partnerships with AT&T, Motorola, Sony, Philips, you know, even IBM. All the large companies that are not into pivoting. Right?
So you could see this coming. It's one thing to see it coming, and then one day there's a decision for you that says, there's been this cluster of problems, and today's the day I go.
Right.
And at that point, is it easy because you've been seeing it coming for so long, or is it still a hard thing?
No, it's still heartbreaking. I mean, for me personally, it was still heartbreaking because of all these individuals that you saw, and so, you know, at that point I was already sort of a veteran because, you know, all these guys were, you know, 10 years younger than I was. So I felt a profound sense of responsibility and for letting them down in their enormous vision and drive and all the hard work and everything else. So it was very difficult. I didn't want to abandon ship. But at the same time, I was VP of marketing, and there was just very little I could do. There was not, you know, I was not useful at that point to the company, I felt.
So Chet, the Supreme Court ruled against Aereo, very high-profile case, summer of 2014. It seemed very clear from the outside that you guys were done. Barry Diller, who had been funding you, basically walked away that day. But you kept going for several months. There were bankruptcy proceedings. You were trying to find some other way to keep the company going. Did you know in your heart that it was done and you were sort of going through the motions, or did you think you could save the company?
No. I think so. We started the company with a very specific focus and a binary switch, which was either we're going to win and it's going to make everybody really, really happy. And
You knew you were going to end up at the Supreme Court one day.
yeah, that was the start. Day one, we knew that was what we were going to do, and we ran the company that way. I used to tell every employee that don't count on a job in 18 months or whatever it is when we would hire. And whenever we took investment, we would tell people that, now's your time to pull back out. No harm, no foul. Because, the mission of the company was break up the cartel, right? That had nothing to do with anything else.
And just for context, your idea was I don't want to get into the legality of it, but you were going to take TV broadcasts over the airwaves
Right.
and distribute them over the internet without paying people for that, right? And the Supreme Court ruled against that. So you told people that there's a high likelihood this thing will fail. It's one thing to tell them that, it's another thing to pull the plug. So you were going, after the Supreme Court ruled against you, you were still trying to make the company work in some capacity.
So as a CEO, my job, you have a fiduciary responsibility to your employees and more importantly, your shareholders to maximize whatever you can for them. And so, there was a lot of interest in buying the company just because it was an incredibly talented team and what we accomplished is technologically speaking in a period of 18 months. I mean, the company was only around 3 years, was immense. So there was a desire on my part to keep the team together. There was a bunch of interest in acquiring the company. And we went down the wire with a bunch of acquirers. And the challenge we kept running into, there was no way to take the money out of the shell. And it was substantial amounts of money. And so when we realized that after
Because the networks were suing you when they wanted those assets.
It's, the settlement at the end of the day was like $6-8 million, something in that range. But it was just going to be a process. And if a certain amount of fatigue had set in, and both Diller and myself and all the investors, they were like, look, it's better to do something more interesting than to try to just return capital. And so that was my responsibility, was to try to accomplish that, which is what I was trying to do.
And so you shut down the company, but you were telling me that basically the same day, within 24 hours, you went back and rehired most of the people who'd been working there,
Right.
and then went back to your old investors and said, I'm starting a new thing.
Right.
So there was no gap for you.
There was no gap.
I assume that makes it easier to leave the old thing.
Well, personally, it does make. I'm the type of a person that I have. There's a compulsion to build stuff, right? So that and it was arguably an incredible team, and I think incredible teams for me is very, very, very artists in their discipline, and in particular in our case, we were doing software, hardware, RF. And consumer experiences, design, marketing, all those kinds of things, and those teams are just amazingly difficult to put together. And it was a great, talented group, and I sort of said, you know what, I'm going to do something again, and for me to take a year off, which I was in a position to do, or chill out for a while, but a lot of people weren't. It was unfair to them, and we all loved working together. It was such a tight-knit group of folks. So, yeah.
You basically rehired the entire existence. Did anyone say, I would rather not work at a high-risk startup again?
All startups are high risk, right? It's just nature of the beast. Aereo in particular was designed to be, a step function. Either there was going to be billions of dollars or it was going to be zero, and we were okay with that. A few people we said, you know what, I'm tired and I want to go somewhere else, or go to Hawaii and move and things like that. There's certain people we didn't want to take. So I think we took about 25 or so to start, and then we're about 70 people, 65, 70 people now, and I think half are probably ex-Aereo.
So Dalton, how do these stories sound familiar? You were at iMeme, which is an early music streaming service. At one point, it raised a lot of money.
Yeah.
Like many digital music services, didn't work out.
I don't recommend those.
Yeah. Although one of them finally seems like it's working.
I think the jury's still out on that. I don't know. You know more about it.
They haven't made any money yet, but
Yeah.
it seems like they might be able to one day.
I think that when you're running a startup, you constantly have near-death experiences, and near-death experiences are part of the game. Think about how many times Tesla almost died, and we know about that one. I think if you know the real story about any eventually hugely successful startup, there's always a point, or several points, when they're just this far where if the coin flip would have gone the other way, boom, they're dead. And I think to make it to a late stage as a startup, you have to succeed and win that coin flip a number of times. And what it feels like to fail at a late stage is that you actually kept winning the coin flip. Things kept going your way, And the time when you do fail, or the time when you realize the company is over, is when you have a near-death experience and the patient doesn't make it. I think a VC told me that once. We lost the patient.
So what was that moment for you at IME? Again, in retrospect, from the outside, it seemed like, oh, this is a failing company and you guys are going down the hole, but you were kept at it for a while.
I think one of the things we talk about in Y Combinator is that the two things that kill companies are running out of money and the founder giving up. And most of the time, it's the latter. And so I think when you lose hope, when you see no other path, both of the folks on stage just talked about it, it's actually hope that sustains you through these near-death experiences. And I think I got to the point personally, and I think my investors did, and the board did, and the employees did, where it felt like, how many more near-death experiences do we need to get past for this to be worth doing? And it started to feel less and less, it started to feel almost ridiculous to continue to deal with the complications around licensing, around lawsuits, and the same stuff that current music streaming services are dealing with. They're constantly being sued by the publishers. They're constantly, huge campaigns against them. And it started to feel ridiculous to us. And I think that was a big turning point. And the other thing is, look, I see companies fail every week on the inside because at Y Combinator, we fund hundreds of companies. And so at this point, I know exactly what it looks like from the outside. And so much of it is when the team loses faith, when they no longer believe the fight is worth fighting, that is generally where gravity will pull you back to earth.
But is there a gap between, people are leaving, your old investors aren't returning your calls, but you still are continuing to run the company? You sort of, in my mind, I sort of imagine you as the sort of the road runner over the cliff,
yeah,
right?
But sometimes it works. That stuff totally happens. And sometimes the person pulls it off, and then everyone that turned their back on them is like, "Oh, we were wrong. Just kidding. We were rooting from you silently from the sidelines." Those kinds of lines come out. And look, the history is written by the winners, and a lot of different folks that have been hugely successful, huge companies, have had those tough periods where they are the road runner running off, but magically they find another. They hit the road again, and good for them.
So one of the stories that Silicon Valley tells about itself is that it celebrates failure and it likes the idea that things don't work and then people pick themselves up again. Does that actually map out? Does that actually map with reality, or is there a stink or whatever the metaphor is?
I think there's some subtlety there. I think certain kinds of high-profile failure aren't necessarily celebrated as much, and we can talk about what that means. But garden variety failure, which is I tried something, I did my very best. I exhausted every possible resource at my ability, and it didn't work. I do think is respected. Again, just like a stat from Y Combinator, 40% of the people we fund had previously applied and been rejected. And so the people that we actually fund on a forward basis are people that previously we decided not to fund. And that's the case with every aspect of funding and who you choose to work for. It's not like you're damaged goods if your first thing didn't work or we didn't think it worked. It's having the grit and determination come back is something that's celebrated. And again, there is some subtlety between that and like, holy cow, what a mess that was. That is not necessarily celebrated to the same degree.
And Chet, you were saying your investors all came back basically the day after you shut down the company.
Not only did they come back, they were, poured giant amount of capital. And our case was very different in a lot of ways because it was designed to either, be a binary outcome. And I think what we got judged by was, did these guys build a great product? Did they pull off what they said they were going to do technologically? And and I'm very proud of my team in that sense. We're good at understanding kind of where the trends are going to collide, and then building a product very rapidly around it, and complex products, not sort of a silly app somewhere, right? And we're all mission-driven people, right? So even Starry now ambition is we're going to build a multi-gigabit wireless ISP for US and then ultimately in multiple countries.
Beam internet to me.
Exactly, and those we're all driven by fairness in the marketplace, good products, great design, and doing something that's going to move the needle. And in those things, and the only claim to fame we have is we get it done, right? And we have sort of as a group that reputation in the market that if there's a complex product to build, these guys can build it. So for us, my company prior to that, which Microsoft acquired, and it was great to see Bill on stage, and I think every time I see him, my respect sort of goes up. That was a series of near-death experiences, and I think you're absolutely right. And again, we were down the wire and we were going to get acquired by Google at one point, and I just didn't like the interaction that we had, and I walked out. And that was, my VCs stopped showing up for board meetings after that because they were like, this guy, he doesn't know what he's doing or whatever it is. And we literally, pulled off a XXX exit after that, a year and a half later. So I think this is, we know how to sort of grind stuff through and get it done.
Joanna, I asked you this question. You had sort of a nuanced answer to it when we were talking before about sort of whether or not you're allowed to get a second or third chance.
Well, I think you are allowed to get a second and third chance, that's for sure. And the examples are many. But I think it also very much depends on what you drew out of that experience, right? So being on the hiring end of people who have come to me from failed companies and applied for a job, for me that was never a demerit. You never say, but what was a demerit is listening to their reasoning. And so, and it's the same for everybody else. When somebody comes to you and says, well, this company failed because of these circumstances, and there is no self-reflection, there is no, here is what I was responsible for, here's what I did wrong, this is what I would change, or now I understand which factors lead to, what are the conclusions you drew out of the experience? And that's very important because very often what happens is that, and the people who succeed are the ones that draw the conclusions, but what happens very often is you get the people who come and immediately start the blame game, right? It's, oh yeah, it was, I blame this, I blame that, and there were no personal rich conclusions that they drew out of that experience. So how you learn is very much a function of whether you will be appreciated for your past failures or you won't be. So there is that nuance. Just because you were a part of a failing endeavor doesn't mean you learned anything from it, right? So.
We talked a little about what Chet did next after you just didn't pause. You just went right to the next thing. Joanna and Dalton, when your first projects, or the projects we're talking about here, didn't work, what was the next step for you? Did you retreat? Did you say, I'm going to take time off? Did you go, I have a thing I want to do as well?
Well, you have to take into consideration that I think we were all at very different stages in our lives. For me, this was, again, I always loved being at the bleeding edge. So this was, if I count properly, my fifth one that didn't work out. And I include the Macintosh in that, by the way, because after the first 100,000 that we sold, a huge disappointment.
One of the things that was true in the Steve Jobs movie is that the first Mac was not a success.
Well, not a success after the first 90 days, yeah. No, this was one of many things that I had done where I got enormous personal satisfaction out of it because I love being at that hairy edge of excitement of the new technology and so on, but and the enormous risk. But this was my big push yet again. And after that, I decided to retreat for a little bit. I was at a different stage in my life. If I had been, I don't want to put it all on age, but if I had been, 5 years younger or whatever, I would have probably gone on and done yet another thing.
Jumped in right away.
But at that point in my life, I thought I would rather work in the more nonprofit area and more for causes rather than products, at least for a while.
So Dalton, you sold I'm off to MySpace.
Yep.
This is so long ago that MySpace was still a thing.
Sort of.
Was there a consideration that you would go with the company, or were you done?
Yeah, there was a whole mess around that. That was that was when Owen was running the company, and I was going to work with Owen, and then right as it was about to close, then Owen was out, so it was kind of a mess. So yes, the intention was to go with the company, but because of internal stuff at MySpace, I didn't end up going. So I ended up starting another company.
And what was the gap between not going to MySpace and starting the next company?
Weeks. It wasn't very long. I was like, well, I guess I should start a new company. I didn't really think too much about other stuff. At that point, I was really focused on wanting to get back to writing code and building products after running a larger organization. And so that's the itch that I wanted to scratch.
It's pretty hard to imagine because I didn't talk to Joanna at the time, but I talked with both of you guys at various times as things were going south, and you look bad, right? Running a company is hard. Running a failed company is very hard. You both looked like you'd been beaten up. It seems like you should take some time off and rest and probably eat better. And doesn't anyone give you that advice? Like, just chill out for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, there's reasonable aspects of that advice. It's just, and I thought that was going to happen. Like in my mind at the time, I thought I was being set up to chill out at the time. But like I said, because of the way life works, I ended up where it all worked out to start another company again, and that felt right in the moment. I think it's the same with him.
Yeah, for me, I guess for me, anyways, very personally, my work is a really integral part of my identity to myself, and maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, I don't know. But it took me a long time to recognize that that's what it is. And unless I'm doing something really interesting, tough, complicated, it just is not satisfying. So, and after I'd sold my previous company to Microsoft, there was a period in about a year where I was just relaxing in the sense, I still had a job at Microsoft, working through the transition and everything else, but it wasn't terribly satisfying. And I realized I was, not happy. My identity, how I think of myself, how I think of, and I sort of jokingly say this, after I turn 40, I'm playing the back nine and I want to make it count. I really need to put up a big score. And it's kind of how I was raised. So
that notion of scoring and the size of the score is important to you. Dalton, I remember talking to you after you'd raised money for what was then called Pick Please.
Yeah.
It was $5 million, I think was the number.
Yeah.
It was a big number, and it gave you a big valuation for basically
really?
a nap. When it was the thing that struck me was you saying, well, if I'm going to do another company, I want this to be a big, big, big success. There's a rational argument for you could have taken less money and you could have been successful with a smaller exit. And you said, I don't want that. I want this to be a home run, otherwise it's not worth doing. Did you guys all have sort of similar reactions?
So I never count money. Is personal view for me is that's an out. I mean, it's great to have money and you can go to nice places, buy fancy shoes.
And you made a bunch of money.
I made a bunch of money. I was very fortunate about it.
Those are very expensive shoes. They look like expensive.
For me, it's moving something, a big boulder up, which nobody is either capable of, wants to. I mean, the value. I don't live here or operate in California, but it's on the East Coast. But you talk to a lot of venture capitalists or people here. Nobody really has the appetite. They don't think of. I mean, it's probably Tesla and SpaceX are the two that shine as companies that are focused on really moving the world forward. And I think that's reflective of the founder. But that's fun. That's interesting. That's like I always live my life as what do I want on my tombstone, and the tombstone's got to be badass and somebody who wasn't afraid of building something big and meaningful.
I think it's important to set intention. And I think implicitly, if you're like, I'm going to do something and I'm not going to take any risks, you're actually setting yourself up for a huge disappointment. If it's worth doing, in my opinion, it's worth trying your very best and having as open-minded.
But there's a middle ground, right? If you say, I want to make this work, but it doesn't need to be $1 billion, however you measure it, it doesn't need to be a world-changing company.
It's like saying, I want to,
I mean, I've worked for people who said, well, our plan is to be number 2 or 3 in the market. Oof. Wasn't that fun?
Well, to pick up on your point is that I have rarely seen, at least in the tech world, companies succeed who have gone in there with the intention of achieving a substantial financial goal. At least in my experience, it's always been people who really want to make a difference. It's the cause almost. It's almost the cause rather than the details of how you're going to make that a financial success. And by the way, financial success sometimes comes and sometimes doesn't come, right? But there is a sense of profound satisfaction in working on something that you think is going to be incredibly meaningful and huge. So for me, after I left the profit world, I was interested in the environment and the fact that we could make the air in California cleaner and better and reduce our carbon footprint. So, you know, there are different types of people, and some people set themselves the goals of really difficult goals and projects, and they thrive on that, fully knowing that you may fall on your face.
But you told me that you personally are looking to do things where that you know that you'll be able to, the odds of achieving something are higher because that's what you want to spend your time on.
Now, as I age, yes, as I age, I think that's definitely the case. But when I was young, you know, it's what I would encourage people to in their youth to, if this is the thing that makes you tick, always take the path of the huge, something that could make a huge difference, right? But fully well acknowledging the fact that you're going to probably fall on your face, and if you're the type of person that if you fall on your face, you're going to really get you know, damaged by that, and you have to know yourself, right? It's all so individual, right? Don't you think? The
reality is you are not going to take money when you die, right? The pharaohs tried this thing; it didn't quite work out for them, and so why bother? I mean, the thing you'll probably get when you die, hopefully peacefully, is going to be
you
did
cool
something
tombstone.
Interesting, and you were good to your family and your children or spouse or whatever that happens to be, and you lived, good life, and that's far more important than whether you made another $10 million or $1 billion or whatever the number happens to be.
I have more questions. Let's see if anyone in the audience wants to ask you guys. This is a rare opportunity to talk to some pretty cool folks.
Doesn't this all revolve around the evolving definition of success?
Do you want to tease that one out a little bit?
Well, I came up, as several of these guys, around the world where changing the world and inventing something that's important, and there are several people on the panel who certainly reflect that, is a success. And it doesn't have to do with money per se. And it feels to me, pardon me for speaking too long, it feels to me like people have lost sight of what success actually means.
I tend to agree with you that in vast parts of the world, changing, creating, inventing is valued far more than how much, what do you have in your bank account. If the outcome is that it comes with something in your bank account, awesome, right? And you give it away or spend it, do whatever you want.
Dalton, you're on the front line. You get a new crop of startup founders every couple months at Y Combinator. Do they want to change the world, or do they want to do something that's less ambitious than that?
I think they definitely want to change the world. I think that's something.
They have to say that, right? Do they mean it?
I think, yeah. I mean, look, there's a lot of them, so I can't speak for everyone, but generally, yeah, that's what would make, it's kind of an irrational decision to start a company. In a lot of ways, it's a very irrational decision, and so you need to have that core fire and belief to want to do it. And I agree with the question. I mean, like, how we define what success is and how we give ourselves meaning in our lives is very important. And it's up to you to solve that internally. External validation of your success, external validation that you did well at something, if that's what you're feeding on, you're going to end up being a pretty empty person someday. And so I think it's up to everyone, whether they're successful or not, to come to terms with what gives them meaning in their lives and decide for themselves if the stuff they're doing makes sense. And like, that's a tough place to be.
And before somebody says that that's like, that's loser talk. I mean, I went through a, post-loss and I was talking to Barry and I said, I'm really sorry. And he was like, no, you told me what you wanted to do. You set out and you did it, and you did it exactly how you said you were going to do it. And you changed the industry and you moved things forward. And I think that's a massive success. And so I'm lucky that I have, people that are close to me that validate that.
But I just wanted to address what you said, the changing definition of success, because I was just talking to a few people here who run companies and now have millennials working for them, and their definition of success is different than it was for certainly for me, and probably for you too. And that is that they were saying they really want the life-work balance. We talked about that before. Somebody mentioned harmony is a better word than balance. But it's a little bit different because I think in my generation we never talked about that.
You guys were sleeping at the office.
We were sleeping at the office, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, the people who did have families and had to run to them, they engendered quite a bit of resentment. Like, it was a choice. You decided to have a kids. Why are you leaving so early? So, but things are different. Even young people appreciate the fact that there has to be a certain balance. So I would say that the definition of success has changed. And I'm not quite sure that I think to this day, because I did have kids, I feel kind of apologetic about the fact that I did have to take the time. So, I haven't gotten used to that idea. But these younger people clearly have a very different sense of personal success.
Tell my kids.
Hi,
here.
Craig Forman from Next News Ventures, and I'd like to first congratulate you. This is a difficult topic, and I think you've had a very interesting discussion about a lot of different issues. Hard to do. My question is, some of you may have been here when Jeff Bezos on the first night talked about his way of evaluating when to sort of fold the cards. And all of you as general managers and as executives, I myself as an investor, general manager type, I think we know subjectively when we walk in, I think you mentioned it, you can sort of feel, I won't describe it, but you can feel the failure in a place that is on the edge of failure. But he said it's when the last high value champion folds the cards. What for you is your best objective criteria for when it's that moment of knowing that things are over, as opposed to subjective?
Let's do a speed round. When does that bell ring?
Why don't you start at that end? Because I have to think
it's
about
not
that.
objective, but when you talk to the team, when you talk to the founders, and they're demoralized, that word demoralized, the idea of folks that give up hope, and you ask them, well, what are you going to do, and what's the plan? And they're like, that's when you know when they're out of ideas, essentially.
Chet?
It's a difficult, I've never been exactly in this because the spectacular failure I had was purposeful, right? It was very binary in that sense. But it's interesting, I think I love that comment that Bezos made about, when the last high value person. The problem in startups is that's you, the founder, CEO, whatever the notion happens to be, because VCs are wonderful when things are growing great, and they're meddlesome and useless largely when things are not going great. I've had board meetings in which I've gotten advice like, we were going to do $10 or $15 million on something in revenue. And they're like, well, how many salespeople is that? And I was like, with 15 or whatever the number was. And they were like, well, why don't we hire 50 more and then you'll do 100? And I'm like, are you retarded? I mean, like, where'd you come from? That's not how life works. So the problem in startups is that, at least this is sort of my personal psyche, you go to bed one day and you're absolutely convinced this is wrong, this is wretched, this is stupid, it's never going to work. And you wake up the next morning and you get one little piece of news from somebody, whether your team or whatever, and suddenly the sky is blue and bright and this is awesome, all things are going to get realized. It's such a roller coaster, and I think the teams that understand that and understand that go to bed, it's going to be okay tomorrow.
Joanna,
and one of my co-founders says this, like, there's some days you shouldn't come to work, and it's okay because it's just shitty.
Should we let Leah, or do you want to?
I would say that getting the temperature of your team and the fact when you have to be the motivator and you find it difficult to be to find all the reasons to resurrect, as you see, to go with your near-death experiences, when you yourself are in that position. Then it's
And
when you are one of those, the last ones with the cards, and you are about to fold, then there is no one else left to pick it up. Because if you don't feel like coming to work one day and you know that there is somebody to pick up the cards, there is at least one more enthusiastic person there, that's okay. But if there isn't and you're the one.
So it's an easy answer when there's no one left. Lee, real quick.
Chet, you've mentioned this binary by design question. There are a lot of other companies who have an existential legal question that is the basis of their business today.
Lee, should we talk about where you worked last?
We don't have to do that.
Okay.
But my question to you is, in contrast to these others, should other companies be doing more binary by design? Should they be testing the market through the legal and regulatory system? Or should they be
So I think that
designing
the
around it?
challenge, and by the way, one comment on on civics, absolutely loved Elon's talk. The one thing that he did not mention in the small rudder for a big ship analogy with the president is that the president does appoint federal judges, including the Supreme Court. And in this country where the legislature is largely frozen from a rulemaking perspective or new laws, the courts are running the country, effectively speaking. So you really do need to pay attention to kind of who gets in or not. So to that point, I think Washington, it is so arcane, and I got a crash course in lobbying, and if you think the Supreme Court isn't lobbied, you're silly, because the courts, everybody's lobbied heavily. The system is absolutely arcane. They are still applying stuff that was written in 1937, and you can have a constitutionalist view and say you don't. But I think for certain things, statutory reform is absolutely necessary. Copyright is one area in which that is important. Telecom is another area where these things need to move forward. The question is how do you move that forward? We are not a set of group of people that are going to go petition the government. That's not how our system works, right? We're not gonna, you can't influence a rule in Washington, right? Comcast gives $10 billion, or whatever the number happens to be, probably not 10 billion, but a substantial, I'm not picking on Comcast, every company is in the same boat. So how do you test, how do you, as a new entrant, do something? And I think testing the boundaries is probably the only way you have to do it. You have to do it in a legitimate, interesting way where you do think you have an opening, as we thought in Ariel's case, and we won all the way to the Supreme Court. The reason you have to be very thoughtful, and sometimes I cringe when I hear crazy ideas. People, think I'm the cowboy of all copyright things, right? So the reason I cringe is because you can make really, really bad law by making a stupid argument. And so if somebody's going to do it, you really have to, get an army of lawyers and get it well capitalized, because it's not trivial. And you will do yourself and the rest of us a huge disservice by creating bad law, which has happened in particular in the Ninth Circuit in Com.
So would you do it again? Would you force it to a decision, or would you come up with a way to plan around it?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think we would. I think we would probably amplify what we had done. I think we wanted to end up in the Supreme Court in 5 years. We ended up in 3. That was probably the one thing that we lost. We couldn't control the clock anymore. But yeah.
Great. We're going to leave it there. I really want to thank you guys. This is not a discussion we normally have. I think everyone appreciates and your candor and courage for coming on up here. Thanks again.
Thank you.